gave them everything, his home, his name, his love. But one evening, they knocked on his door with DNA tests and eviction papers. His wife, his brother, his kids. None of it was what it seemed. They thought they'd destroyed him. What they didn't know was that he had just begun to fight. The golden dusk filtered through the tall windows of Merritt Sloane's home office, casting elongated shadows across the walnut flooring. It had been a productive afternoon. The quarterly results for his firm, Sloane Equity Group, had exceeded projections. In a market climate marked by chaos, his strategies once again proved resilient. Still dressed in his tailored navy suit from a long day of meetings, Merritt leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a rare moment of quiet. The stillness, however, didn't last. The doorbell broke the calm with a sharp, unexpected chime. Merritt checked the time. 6:45 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. Upstairs, his wife, Ramona, was getting ready for what had become their tradition. Friday dinner, no work talk, no phones. The kids were out at their scheduled activities: Emmer's track meet, Jasper's robotics club, and Clara's private piano session. For once, the house was at peace. Another chime followed, more urgent. Merritt rose, buttoning his jacket out of reflex. At 46, his athletic frame remained a reflection of his early days as a college decathlete. Control and discipline had carried him through life, through business, family, success. The idea that something unplanned could breach that order unsettled him. Approaching the door, he caught the outline of 3 figures through the frosted glass. One immediately familiar. Deacon Price, his younger half-brother, flanked by 2 men in slick suits. The sight froze Merritt for a beat. Deacon hadn't shown his face in over a year. Their last contact had been short and tense. A disagreement about a minor investment deal. Merritt opened the door slowly, tension already crawling up his spine. Deacon stepped forward without invitation, a faint smirk playing on his face. The lawyers entered behind him, not saying a word as their shoes echoed crisply against the floor. The energy shifted. Something dark had entered the house. What followed came like a surgical strike. Deacon spoke in clipped tones, his words rehearsed, delivered like the final line in a game of chess. He revealed a history that shattered Merritt's sense of reality. That Ramona, Merritt's wife of over a decade, had been involved with Deacon, intimately, consistently, and deliberately. Not only had the affair spanned years, but it had also begun long before Merritt and Ramona had even married. Merritt felt the words wash over him like a wave of static, his mind instinctively trying to discard them. But then came the documents. One of the lawyers stepped forward and handed over a thick envelope. DNA test results. Data points and medical terms danced across the page in black and yellow, their meaning undeniable. Each child, all 3, 0 biological connection to Merritt, all linked to Deacon with near absolute certainty. Merritt didn't speak. Ramona descended the stairs a moment later, the timing as intentional as her silk robe and measured steps. There was no trace of remorse in her expression, only composure. Her voice was precise, cruel, and matter-of-fact. She confirmed it all: the deception, the manipulation, the calculated nature of their marriage. She claimed it had all been part of a greater plan, one rooted in power, money, and control. She aligned herself physically with Deacon, standing at his side like a partner closing a deal. The message was clear. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It had been coordinated, sustained, and deeply rooted. More legal papers followed. A petition for full asset division, a motion to freeze accounts, and even a request for full custody of the children based on fraudulent paternity. Merritt's grip on the envelope tightened as the last page dropped into his hands. An eviction notice. The house Ramona had convinced him to jointly title years ago, now a contested property. He stood still, letting the storm pass through him. His mind didn't panic. Calculated. The years he'd spent building his business from scratch, the networks he'd maintained, the contracts he'd reviewed line by line. They hadn't prepared him for this, but they had trained him to remain unshaken under pressure. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. He didn't raise it. He didn't beg or plead. He instructed. He told them to leave before the children returned, that he wouldn't have his kids walk into a scene designed to humiliate and destabilize. He warned them quietly, firmly, that whatever game they thought they were playing, they had made one fatal mistake. They believed he could be broken. Deacon laughed it off, emboldened by the false belief that the DNA gave him every advantage. Ramona added a final insult before turning her back. One last slash meant to ensure the wound stayed open, but Merritt's response wasn't rage. It was promise. After they left, the silence returned, this time with a sharpness he hadn't known before. The broken photo on the floor, the empty foyer, the papers in his hand. They were fragments of a past life, now severed. He picked up his phone and made 3 calls. Not to friends, not to therapists, to his lawyer, his tech strategist, and a private investigator. The sun had set behind the house, casting a soft amber on the walls, but Merritt stood firm in the center of it all. The rules had changed. The illusion had shattered. But the war? The war had only just begun. Merritt Sloan's new residence was a sterile 1-bedroom corporate apartment on the 12th floor of a business district tower in Baltimore. It wasn't much. Beige walls, minimal furniture, no traces of family. But for now, it was safe. It offered proximity to his office and, more importantly, distance from the chaos his brother and wife had detonated inside his former home. It had been 5 days since everything came crashing down. 5 days since Deacon Price and Ramona Finch had delivered their coordinated ambush. 5 days since Merritt had watched the 2 people closest to him reveal themselves as conspirators in a slow-burning betrayal that had lasted over a decade. Now he sat at a modest kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, laptop open, and legal pads stacked with handwritten notes. The war had moved from emotional to tactical. The first call went to Don Harper, the only attorney Merritt trusted completely. Don wasn't flashy. He didn't posture in courtrooms. But behind closed doors, he was lethal. Over 3 decades of practice had earned him quiet influence in all the right places. When Merritt laid out the situation, Don didn't ask redundant questions. He requested names, dates, and digital access. His tone never rose. "You've already won," Don said after hearing the details. "They just don't know it yet." The second call was to Lucia Wren, head of cybersecurity for Sloan Equity. She arrived at the apartment the following evening, dressed in black, carrying a matte gray laptop and a portable server. She said little, instead setting up a perimeter scan of Merritt's home and devices. "You were compromised," she said after an hour. "All your devices. Someone mirrored your phone. They've been listening for years." The implications were devastating. Every investment move, every call with clients, internal strategies, deal points. Deacon had had access to all of it. It wasn't just personal betrayal. It was industrial espionage. Merritt's own firm had been the source of insider information for his brother's trading success. And Ramona had been the courier. Lucia began reconstructing the data trail, quietly uploading encrypted folders onto a secure cloud. Each folder contained damning proof. Timestamps, access logs, IP addresses, downloads traced to Deacon's firm. Surveillance on Merritt hadn't been sloppy, it had been methodical. The third piece of the response fell into place with Stellan Voss, a former financial auditor who now specialized in forensic recovery. At 58, Stellan had the tired look of a man who'd witnessed too much corporate rot to be surprised anymore. But as Merritt laid out the full story, even Stellan's eyes narrowed with contempt. "They weren't just manipulating your trust," he said, flipping through a printout of bank statements. "They were manipulating market behavior using your data." He traced the money, loans taken against the children's trusts, unauthorized transfers masked as charitable giving, and shell entities that matched Deacon's off-record affiliations. It wasn't just betrayal. It was criminal conspiracy. One night, as rain battered the windows of his apartment, Merritt sat at the table reviewing recovered email threads between Ramona and Deacon. Most were encrypted, but a few had been stored on a forgotten backup account. In one, Ramona wrote, "He's perfect. So focused on building his empire, he doesn't see a thing. We'll have everything when the time is right, his name, his wealth, his legacy. You and me." That email had been sent 3 days after she'd met Merritt at a private equity conference. Every choice she made after that point, their engagement, the timing of the children's births, her suggestion to co-sign property, all were moves on a chessboard Merritt hadn't even known he was standing on. But now he was. And this time he saw the board clearly. He began building a digital map on the wall of his apartment. The timeline. Red yarn and pins, old school but effective. Connections between offshore accounts, trust distributions, and phone metadata. He included psychological profiles, Deacon's pattern of manipulation, Ramona's behavioral shifts, even school records and family photos. Not to obsess, to prepare. He wasn't planning retribution. He was preparing for surgical justice. They had used a DNA test to try and strip him of everything. But Merritt knew something Deacon didn't. Legacy wasn't built in blood, it was built in action. He made his final call that night to Silas Quinn, a former federal investigator turned private intel contractor. Silas had been instrumental in exposing fraud inside one of the nation's largest banks. He agreed to meet the next morning. By the end of the week, the core of Merritt's counterstrike team was in place. Legal, digital, financial, investigative. Each of them specialists. Each with a personal reason to hate people like Deacon and Ramona. The final piece was restraint. Merritt didn't rush. He didn't make threats. He didn't confront them. He let Deacon think he'd won. Let Ramona play the victim card. Let their lawyers posture and push filings. The slower the pace, the more confident they'd feel. Meanwhile, his wall map grew. So did the evidence. And so did the silence. Cold, deliberate, and patient. For the next several weeks, Merritt Sloan played a dangerous but calculated role, that of the defeated man. He showed up to shareholder meetings with an exhausted look in his eyes. He missed a board dinner on purpose. At the children's school, he kept his head down and left quickly, not pausing to chat with other parents. It was all intentional. He knew Deacon and Ramona were watching, and if they believed he was broken, distracted, unraveling, they would become sloppy. Behind the scenes, nothing could be further from the truth. Merritt's apartment had evolved from a temporary living space into a war room. His timeline, now sprawling across the walls and table surfaces, had grown to include connections to other families, victims of Deacon's previous arrangements. These weren't isolated betrayals. Deacon had a pattern, a method. And now, thanks to Silas Quinn's contacts, Merritt had their stories. Some had involved children. Others had ended in quiet divorces, sealed settlements, reputations destroyed. None of them had fought back. Merritt intended to change that. With Don Harper building the legal trap, Lucia Wren maintaining surveillance, and Stellan Voss tracing financial threads through hidden trusts and ghost accounts, the structure of the case began to solidify. Layer by layer, they uncovered evidence of tax evasion, insurance fraud, and misuse of children's identities for financial leverage. The goal wasn't just to prove betrayal. It was to prove criminal intent beyond a shadow of a doubt. One evening, Merritt received a message from his sister, Kelly, who had taken the children in temporarily to give them some consistency. "Clara's asking why she hasn't seen you," the message read. "Ethan's withdrawn. Emmer barely speaks." Gutted him. Every part of him wanted to drive to them to explain everything. But he couldn't, not yet. If Ramona twisted even one innocent interaction into legal ammunition, it could sabotage everything. He had to stay away to protect them. And so he waited. He turned that pain into fuel, into sharper focus. He doubled down on every task, reviewing email logs with Lucia, planning court strategy with Don, checking every line item Stellan uncovered. The pressure mounted, but Merritt never cracked. He knew this part of the story would hurt the most, but it was also the part that would define the ending. Then came the break they needed. Lucia found an old audio recording, deeply hidden in a cloud archive, that Ramona had misfiled under a benign folder title. In it, she and Deacon were speaking candidly at what they believed was a secure private setting. Their voices were clear, unguarded. "Ramona, he still believes I married him for love. Can you believe that? Deacon, let him. We're almost there. The kids, the house, the portfolio, we're taking it all. Ramona, He's just convenient. Always has been. Always will be. That recording, combined with a trail of communications about falsified loan documents tied to the children's names, was enough to trigger interest from federal agencies. Don reached out to a contact in the Securities and Exchange Commission. Within a week, an official inquiry was opened into Deacon's trading patterns and their suspicious correlation with Sloan Equity's internal activity. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was alerted next, thanks to Stellan's reports of potential identity misuse and false claims involving trust funds. It was time. Merritt scheduled a private settlement meeting at Harper Associates, under the pretense of conceding to Deacon and Ramona's demands. The location: a polished, upscale conference room with a panoramic view of the city. Neutral, professional, non-threatening. They wouldn't see the net tightening. When Deacon and Ramona arrived, they brought their usual smug confidence. Deacon was polished, confident in his tailored gray suit. Ramona wore high-end silk, her eyes cold and assessing. Their lawyer opened a leather folio of asset transfer forms and began walking Merritt through the process of letting go. Merritt played his part perfectly. He said little, nodded at the right times, feigned hesitation, allowed just enough uncertainty to flavor the air. Then, with a subtle gesture, Don gave the signal. The door opened. 3 individuals stepped in. Unannounced, quiet, composed. Agents from the SEC and the FBI, and a representative from the district attorney's office. Merritt didn't look at Deacon or Ramona. He didn't need to. Their silence was confirmation enough. Ramona's jaw tightened. Deacon's smile faltered. The documents flipped. The screen came alive with charts, emails, account transfers, encrypted logs, all presented with clinical efficiency. The agents said little. They let the facts speak. Every trade made by Deacon, perfectly timed with Sloan Equity's moves. Every access point logged to Ramona's devices. Every form where she had declared Merritt as the legal father, fully aware of the falsity. As the data poured in, the reality began to sink in. This was not a family dispute. It was a criminal case, and the walls were closing in. The glass conference room at Harper Associates, which only moments before had echoed with confidence from Deacon Price and Ramona Finch, now buzzed with an entirely different energy. The sleek design, mahogany table, and soft city skyline behind the windows had transformed from a neutral business setting into the backdrop of a carefully orchestrated reckoning. Deacon tried to reassert control. He spoke with forced composure, questioning the presence of federal agents, demanding explanations. His voice was firm but not grounded. Ramona, silent at first, soon followed with indignation, her composure cracking. She tried to paint the intrusion as harassment, accusing Merritt of leveraging influence in some petty personal vendetta. But their words fell flat. The agents said little. They simply outlined the scope of the investigation. Insider trading, financial fraud, conspiracy, identity misuse. One by one, the allegations unfolded like a well-rehearsed script, each supported by digital evidence, sworn testimony, and corroborated timelines. Don Harper remained seated beside Merritt, his calm demeanor anchoring the room. He didn't need to interrupt. The screen did all the talking. Lucia Wren's digital reconstruction of data breaches showed years of access from Ramona's devices. Stellan Voss had identified shell accounts linked to off-record trades made hours after private firm meetings. Silas Quinn had provided victim statements from other families. People Deacon had manipulated with the same tactics years prior. Every lie had a record. Every deception left a trace. Ramona's voice eventually faltered. Her questions turned to deflections, then to silence. Deacon kept talking longer, but even his tone wavered. The weight of documented truth doesn't need to shout. As the agents began collecting evidence and issuing formal notifications, Merritt remained quiet. There were no grand speeches, no dramatics. He simply watched as everything they'd built on deceit began to collapse under the weight of real accountability. Later that evening, back at his apartment, Merritt sat alone. The adrenaline had passed, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the open file folders spread across his kitchen table. now empty of secrets, now evidence. His phone buzzed. A message from Kelly. Clara's recital went well. She asked if you'd be home soon. It hurt in a different way because he wasn't. Not yet. The next morning, Don met with Merritt to review final filings. Federal agencies were preparing formal charges. The SEC would pursue insider trading. The FBI had more than enough for fraud and identity theft. The district attorney's office, now fully involved, would focus on conspiracy, custodial interference, and financial endangerment of minors. Ramona and Deacon's legal team tried to counter with negotiations, suggesting settlements in exchange for dropping personal claims. Don rejected the offers without a second glance. There would be no deals. Not this time. Meanwhile, Merritt returned to routine on the surface. He went back to the office. He answered calls. He held team meetings. But beneath the surface, preparations continued. Ramona's lawyer submitted a last-minute motion attempting to delay asset transfers, citing emotional trauma. It was denied. The court acknowledged evidence showing not only premeditated fraud but psychological manipulation. The judge saw through the act. By week's end, formal arrest warrants had been signed. Ramona was taken into custody first, quietly, in the early morning, as she left her temporary downtown residence. Deacon followed the same day, intercepted as he exited the parking structure of his brokerage firm. Neither resisted, neither smiled. The media response was immediate. Merritt declined interviews. He issued a single statement through Don's office. There is no satisfaction in exposing betrayal, only necessity. This was never about revenge. It was about protection of my children, my clients, and the truth. He didn't need anything more. That evening, Merritt returned to Kelly's house. Clara was in the living room practicing piano. Ethan and Emmer sat at the dining table, their homework spread before them. They looked up. They saw their father. There was no dramatic reunion, no long speech, just quiet understanding. He sat between them. He didn't speak about the case. He didn't mention Deacon or Ramona. Instead, he asked about school. He helped Clara with a tricky phrase in her recital piece. He listened to Emmer explain a science project. He corrected Ethan's grammar in an essay. The kids didn't know everything that had happened, but they knew enough. They had felt the absence. They had sensed the tension. But now, seeing Merritt there, grounded and present, was more powerful than any explanation. That night, for the first time in months, Merritt slept in a house filled with peace. Not silence, not tension, just peace. He knew the legal process was far from over. Courtrooms, trials, hearings, it would all come in time. But the worst was behind them. The momentum had shifted. Ramona and Deacon had thrown everything they had in one theatrical blow. But Merritt had weathered it, absorbed it, and now, he was standing, while their foundation crumbled. 10 years later, the house that once witnessed betrayal stood as a monument to resilience. The exterior had been redone, the rooms renovated, but the structure remained the same. What changed was the energy inside it. Merritt Sloan had never sold the property. He had reclaimed it not for nostalgia, but for transformation. On a quiet Sunday evening, the home hummed with activity. Clara, now 20, was home from her final semester at the New York Conservatory, practicing in the music room. Her first recital at the Colburn Hall was just weeks away. Emmer and Ethan, 23, sat in the den debating a recent article about financial ethics, one authored by Ethan himself. After graduating with honors in investigative journalism, he'd built a reputation for exposing corporate abuse. His latest series had gone viral after drawing parallels between historical fraud patterns and cases eerily similar to Deacon Price's old schemes. Merritt listened from the doorway. His children, his in every meaningful sense, had grown into principled, passionate adults. Their pain hadn't been erased, but it had been repurposed into clarity, direction, and strength. A framed copy of a headline hung in his office. Justice served, multi-year financial fraud network brought down by whistleblower case. It was dated 8 years prior, the day both Ramona Finch and Deacon Price had been sentenced. Ramona's pleas in court, centered on motherhood and regret, had failed to sway the judge. Deacon's defense, which attempted to cast him as a pawn in Ramona's manipulation, had collapsed under the weight of evidence. Merritt had attended every court session but never spoke publicly. His power came from restraint, from truth, and from the children quietly seated beside him in the gallery. After the convictions, Merritt had launched a foundation. The Sloan Initiative, focused on providing legal and financial resources to families targeted by internal fraud. Survivors of Deacon's other schemes had joined as advisors. Silas Quinn now worked full-time with the team. Lucia Wren ran the digital security wing. Don Harper, now semi-retired, served as a strategic consultant. Their work reshaped laws across several states, tightening regulations around custodial fraud and insider exploitation within families. The case had become a benchmark in legal and academic circles, eventually included in Harvard's curriculum on corporate ethics. That evening, as Merritt finished setting the table for dinner, Kelly arrived with her husband. She was now a family advocate and counselor, having built a career out of her role in helping her brother rebuild. Behind her came Stellan Voss, still consulting occasionally, and Lucia, now running a cybersecurity firm partnered with Ethan's investigative outlet. They all stayed close, not out of obligation, but because of what they'd built together in the wreckage. At dinner, Clara mentioned her upcoming performance, and Ethan shared that a publisher had approached him about expanding his investigative series into a book. Emmer revealed he'd been accepted into a doctoral program in systems engineering, focused on ethical AI models. Merritt listened, said little. He smiled, not the smile of victory but of peace. After the meal, the group slowly dispersed. Kelly hugged him tighter than usual. Lucia reminded him to take more breaks. Ethan promised to call more often. And Clara left her recital schedule on the fridge with a sticky note. Front row, always reserved for you. Later, as the house quieted, Merritt walked through the halls that once echoed with arguments and deceit. Now they resonated with music, laughter, and a new kind of memory. In his study, the wall that had once been covered in court documents and maps of betrayal now displayed photographs. Clara on stage, Ethan at a journalism awards ceremony, Emmer beside a patent certificate. Mixed among them were framed notes from former victims his foundation had helped. There was no trace of Ramona Finch or Deacon Price. Both had attempted contact over the years, letters, appeals, indirect inquiries. All had been blocked. The children had made their choice long ago. They had changed their middle names, removed the Finch and Price associations from all legal and personal documents, and chosen to retain the name Sloan as a declaration of who their real father was. For Merritt, the final moment of closure had come quietly. No courtroom, no headlines. It was the day Clara asked, without preamble, "Can you help me pick the piece I'll open with?" And he realized. She didn't see him as someone who had been betrayed. She saw him as someone who had never left. That night, Merritt stepped out onto the balcony. The moonlight reflected off the quiet street. He breathed in the cool air and allowed the moment to settle. They had tried to reduce his legacy to a set of test results and forged documents. But they had never understood one thing. Fatherhood wasn't genetic. It was what you stood for when everything fell apart, and what you built after the ruins were cleared.